Well, if we look at the European level, I think there are certain important things that they have done for workers' rights. This concerns particularly health and safety at work. They have quite some leeway there for rules and for inspection, etc., while much less in wage formation. So the discussion now on the minimum wage that started some 2 years ago with the launch of the European Pillar of Social Rights, whether we should have some kind of European level ideas and rules in the end, a directive on the minimum wage, is a very positive thing. It wasn't there before, and at the same time, I think if we look at the discussion, and most of the countries do have a statutory minimum wage, but some don't, and some don't have it for very specific reasons attached to the way they have collective bargaining, and like the Germans had that for a long time, that they opposed having a statutory minimum wage because that would be giving away union negotiation prerogatives to the state. But in the end, they realized that they had a lot of collective bargaining, but rather specific in stronger sectors and not in a low-wage employment sector. And that in the end, that was undermining also the whole system of collective bargaining. So they started advocating a statutory minimum wage. But at the same time, they don't still in Denmark and in Sweden, where they don't have it as a statutory law, but have it on the basis of well, private negotiations in the end between employers and unions. But I think there should be a way, but I'm not entirely familiar with the last development, so I know that the European Parliament has an opinion on it. I don't know exactly how they are now at this moment dealing with the Swedish and the Danish position, but I think that as long as you say, well, that there is something actually as effective as a statutory minimum wage, that you could leave that alone, but that has to be so that countries, that in my view, all countries should have, in principle, according to the directive, a statutory minimum wage, but they could say, well, we have something in place that is as effective, that's a good replacement, and then they have to argue that, and they have to argue that, well, maybe every 5 or 10 years or so, and then they can keep it. So in my view, but I'm not a politician, and I'm not doing that kind of negotiations at that level, but it would be really well, a great missed opportunity if that wouldn't come about as a solid European thing across all the countries. Well, I pleaded today for the same thing in the conference on the living wage, so that's different from the minimum wage, but that as proposed by WYP, how do you pronounce the project? You say the full thing, yeah, okay. Work Yet Poor, that idea of a minimum wage commission, but also there I would advocate that for all countries. I've shown that for my own country, the Netherlands, we are in need of such a thing, given the much outdated views on absolute poverty that they have in the country. Living Wage Commission could also be critical on that situation. So in countries where you have a minimum wage, but then still an independent evaluation of what that minimum wage really means, also in living wage terms, would be very helpful, I think, in all the countries. So I would advocate that too, but that's not a European discussion, that is a Work Yet Poor discussion, to start something like that, and then also integrate that in the annual semester of policy making at the European level. Now, I suppose that will happen in the end with the minimum wage, so let's remain optimistic. So that would be a real reinforcement, I think, in the end, of, well, basic workers' rights. At the same time, I think we cannot say, well, let's leave it to collective bargaining all over the place. So there's a general idea that collective bargaining and social dialogue will help. Well, certainly it will help in places where it's okay, but it's not simply a thing, well, we have so many people covered by collective bargaining, that's okay. No, you have to look deeper in what they actually managed to get done in that dialogue, and that may be very different from simply that 80% is covered. So at the European level, I think they are too optimistic about the role of collective bargaining that you can simply measure that if there's a large coverage of the contracts of the working age population, workers, then you're okay. No, you also have to scrutinize what they actually do or whether that, and also for that purpose, I think the living wage commission could be very helpful so that you really have an independent view also on what collective bargaining really produces in terms of the protection of wage formation from the workers' point of view.